Right, guys, today we move on to Key Knowledge 9, and this one is all about employee expectations. The last key knowledge we looked at was employer expectations, so kind of flipping that around this time. So once again, we can see in study design what it says we need to know. So employee expectations, and then it gives us 4 specific expectations that it wants us to discuss. Now, as with the employer expectations, the list in a study design is not an exhaustive list of every employer expectation that one might find out there, or expectations that employers might have of their employees. Much the same as those 4 there are not the only expectations that employees might have of their job or their employer. Basically, look, people have different values. We all have different motivations. We all have different expectations from our jobs. What motivates one person to turn up to work and do their best might not be the same thing that motivates the next person. We all come from different cultural backgrounds. We have different experiences we bring to the table. We have different attitudes. We're in different financial positions. Therefore, we are all basically motivated by different things. Yeah. So basically what I'm saying is here, we're all different. Okay. It's important to remember. But the study design wants us to focus on those 4 particular employee expectations. So that's going to be our focus. Rather than going too broadly, we'll just stick to the 4 that the study design says. And look, realistically, despite all of the things I just said about everybody being different, having different drives and motivations and different backgrounds, realistically, these are 4 which pretty much most employees, these things would apply to. So this is kind of a fair set of expectations, I guess, to kind of focus on. So that's what we're going to be looking at here. So could just take them in turn. So conditions of employment. Basically, your conditions of employment, it's what's outlined in your contract of employment. And remember, if you're casual, we recognize that you may not have a physical contract of employment. So your conditions of employment tend to be more a bit more of a kind of more running thing, the more spoken rather than said, more how things actually pan out in reality, rather than what's written down in a specific contract. Your conditions of employment are basically going to be based on the relevant award or enterprise agreement that applies to your particular job. So that's what we talked about in the last video, this difference between awards, those contracts that apply to everybody working in the same industry as you, or the enterprise agreement, which would apply to those people working in the same enterprise or business as you. Okay, so it's going to be based on one of those 2 things. And of course, as we said in previous videos, there is a bit of repetition actually in this with the previous couple of videos. The conditions of employment must meet those minimum standards as set out in those national employment standards rather. So hours, leave entitlements and all that sort of stuff. So regardless of where your conditions of employment originate from, whether they be from an award or from enterprise agreement, they have to meet those minimum requirements as stated in those 11 national employment standards. Now, okay, so conditions of employment is one thing, but I guess, look, kind of part of the point of this video is to recognize the fact that businesses can use conditions of employment, and in fact can use all of the things we're going to be talking about here to kind of gain a competitive advantage over competing businesses. Okay, so with our conditions of employment, businesses are very aware that they can attract employees by offering conditions above and beyond those provided in awards. And in fact, if you are paid or if you're contract and you're paid according to a enterprise agreement, that will always be better than the award would have been if you were being paid according to an award. Okay. When you create an enterprise agreement, kind of the starting point is the award, which would apply if you were not putting an enterprise agreement into place, and you kind of work up from there. So things like extra leave, free lunches, gym memberships, access to childcare, whether it's free or subsidized, flexible working arrangements, discounts, whether those discounts are applicable to like your own business's products or services or others as well. Look, kind of the list is endless. But what I'm saying is businesses can offer conditions of employment above and beyond what they need to legally offer, as in what's set out in the awards, those minimum levels, to basically attract good people and then retain them. Attraction and retention, something I'm going to be mentioning a couple of times in this video. And all of the things we're talking about in this video, not just the conditions, but all the other three sort of elements or expectations we're going to talk about can be used in the same way. So there's going to be a bit of a repetitive theme to this, because that's kind of what I want to focus on. How, as a business, you recognize first off that employees have certain expectations of their employment, of their work, of their job, and you can kind of use that to your advantage when you're running a business. So go to remuneration. Now, remuneration is a word that I know from experience not everybody will be familiar with. Look, it's just a fancy word for pay, okay? So it's the financial side of your working. Again, the level of pay that you're receiving is determined by either the award or the enterprise agreement. No different there. And it basically takes one of two forms, okay? You're either paid a salary or you're paid wages. Now, a salary is just basically an amount which is stated kind of at an annual level. So $100,000 a year, $60,000 a year, $400,000 a year, whatever it might be. You are paid usually fortnightly or monthly if you're on a salary. But the actual salary is stated as a yearly amount. And often you see in job adverts, it might mention the word salary package. So it says salary package circa $100,000. What that means is you don't necessarily get pay of $100,000 over the year, but the package indicates that there are other things included in that. So for example, if you had a company car, the value of that company car to you per year would be included in that package. Gym membership, I just mentioned previously, that would be included. So it might be, say, $70,000 in actual money and then $30,000 worth of like valuable benefits. That's what we mean by salary package. So that's important to make a note of and to recognize. And then wages on the flip side is basically when you get paid an hourly or a weekly rate, which obviously would apply to you guys if you have part-time jobs at the moment. So salary, annual, wages are weekly or hourly. And with your wages, you tend to get paid either on a weekly basis or on a fortnightly. So there's a slight difference there. Like if you can be paid fortnightly, if you're on either wages or a salary, you're very unlikely to be paid monthly if you're getting wages, and you're very unlikely to be paid weekly if you are on a salary. Okay. Now, again, with remuneration, a bit like conditions of employment, offering higher than average remuneration can also be used as an attraction and retention tool by businesses. So if you're going to offer pay which is higher than your competitors, so in other words, other businesses operating in your industry, then it kind of makes sense that, people in your industry, people with expertise in what you do, might be attracted to work for you as opposed to your competitors. And then once you have them working for you, hopefully there's more chance you're going to retain them. In other words, keep them rather than going to a competitor because you're offering that higher than average pay. So again, I said pay there, but this also applies to all of the stuff we're talking about in this video. So if you're offering better conditions of employment, if you're offering better pay, and also the things I'm about to talk to, it's a really key attraction and retention tool for businesses. Obviously, there's a cost to doing it. If you're paying more money in salaries, obviously it's more expensive to you. So it maybe sounds kind of counterintuitive to do that. Let's pay more money to our staff because in the long run, we'll make more money. And that doesn't sound to make sense. But actually it's true because, well, it can be true if everything else kind of lines up as well. You've got to see it as an investment in your people. And we'll get to the benefits at the end and kind of tie all this together. Job security was the third employee expectation mentioned on the study design. Basically, all this it kind of refers to an employee believing that their job is kind of secure into the foreseeable future, that they're not going to lose, they're not at risk of losing their job. Doesn't necessarily mean that is true or that is actually going to happen, but it's more about the employee's belief that they might be likely or otherwise to lose their job. Now, this whole idea of job security, to be honest, is kind of a non-existent thing these days. Previous generations gone by, job security was kind of a big thing and it was a big motivator and it kind of kept a lot of people working in businesses for many, many years. If I take my dad, for example, okay? My dad left school at 16 and he died at 57 years old, still working for the same business that he joined when he was 16. So he spent 41 years working for the same company. So I guess that my dad probably, like your grandparents' generation, and if you sort of talk to some of your grandparents, they may, have experienced the same thing. They may have, worked for many, many years for the same business. Now, people my age or your parents' age, that is very, very rare. It would be very rare for one of your parents to basically work for many, many years for the same business. It just doesn't happen anymore. There's lots of reasons behind that, which we don't need to go into. And certainly you guys, there's no way that any of you guys are going to leave school or uni or whatever you do and be working for the same business at the end of your working life. Unless you start your own business, which happens to be running for 40 or 50 years. But it's just not something that happens anymore. So once job security, a job for life, there was this term, a job for life. And particularly if people worked in government organisations, if you got in a government organisation, whether it was, federal or state or local, it was seen as a job for life. But even that now is not the case. So job security is not so much of a thing, not so much of a motivator. Like for me personally, I've had so many different jobs, so many different careers. I was never particularly fussed about job security. My take-in was, well, if something happens and I lost this job, I'll find another one. But you would actually find that most teachers, particularly those who've only taught their whole working lives, feel very, very differently. Job security is a huge, huge thing to them because it's kind of all they've ever known. But look, when a employee does feel secure in their job, at least for the foreseeable future, we're not talking about, for decades, look, they're going to feel valued by the business and they're going to perform better. And if you have employees that are performing better, obviously the business performs better and there's more chance of the business achieving its objectives. So it's still worth bearing in mind that although not many people come into a business these days expecting to be there in 10, 20, 30 years, there's still that sort of short to medium term job security, which can still motivate some people to kind of stay with the business and keep them happy and motivated and working at their best. The final one was work-life balance. Look, I talked about this in the previous video as well. This idea about creating a balance between your job and other personal commitments or, family responsibilities, hobbies, even whatever it might be that you have. Now, the way that businesses do this is basically by offering flexible working arrangements. And there's so many different ways in which you could do this. If you think of the term 9 to 5, okay, 9 to 5 is a term you would have heard. That's kind of like an old school term, yeah? Like 9 to 5 doesn't really exist any day. Like back in the day, like when I got my first office job, management accounting in the early 1990s for BP back in London, basically everybody started work at 9. and everybody finished at 5. That was a working day. And that was pretty common, for office jobs. If you worked in an office, you started at 9, you finished at 5. Now, over the intervening period of time, to get to where we are now, that's really not the case. As long as people put in their 8.5 hours a day, whatever the expectation is in that particular business, most employers are happy for people to come in at 7, finish at 3, come in at 10, finish at 6. Businesses are generally a bit more flexible. That's why, there used to be the rush hour traffic, sort of 8 till about 9:30 in the morning, then sort of 4:30 till 6 in the afternoon. Now, rush hour on the ring road starts about 7 in the morning, goes through most of the morning because, people are going to work at different times now. So there's one way to do it, just be flexible in the hours people can work. You could be flexible in the days people work. You could be flexible in people working from home. Now, of course, having a year and a half of COVID, as I record this video, working from home has become a much, much bigger thing than it ever was before. And moving on after COVID, post-COVID, I'm sure it's going to be a much bigger part of people's working lives as well than it ever were before. So lots of different ways flexible working arrangements can be done, but just recognizing that your employees might have other commitments, offering part-time work, job sharing, so many different ways, but just responding to this expectation now that people have, and it is more of an expectation. People now, employees now, do have more of an expectation than ever that when they join a workplace, there is going to be some kind of flexibility around their working. And it's very unusual now to find a kind of really rigid kind of framework within that people have to work. And again, it increases productivity, increases motivation of employees, reduces their stress, all of that, which increases business performance. And also acts as an attraction and retention tool. Again, from the point of view, say, people are applying for a new job, say someone's an accountant, looking for jobs with accounting firms. If it's known that accounting firm A is really good with their flexibility and offers lots of different options for working in terms of flexible arrangements, more so than company B, then company A is more likely to get more applications and end up with the best people in the market working for them. And then once they're working for them, keep them. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. Using all of these things as tools to attract the best employees and then retain them. So what I'm just going to do, finish this video just by talking about the benefits to a business. Now, I've kind of been touching on this all the way through already, just kind of tying this together, I guess. So what are the benefits to a business of recognizing that employees have these certain expectations of their work and their workplace and their employer? What is the benefit of doing all of these things? Because like I just said, right, there is a cost. Like if you're going to focus on remuneration, you're going to pay more. There's a cost to doing that. All of those things that we've just talked about, generally, that's not the cheapest way to do things. But it's like spending money on advertising. Yeah, there's a cost to spending that money, but what you're hoping is that that is going to lead to increased exposure for your product or your service, which will lead to more sales. And those extra sales are going to make you more money than what that advertising campaign cost you to do in the first place. Yeah, it's an investment. And you look at all of these things as an investment as well. If you're going to pay more money than your competitors, yeah, it's going to cost you more in the short run, but in the long run, you're going to get some of these benefits here. So better reputation. And I'm talking about a reputation from the point of view of being an employer. Once you enter the world of work and you get into a certain industry, you tend to know who the best companies to work for are in your industry. Okay, so back in 2005, 2006, I was doing a bit of recruitment of accountants in the banking sector. At that point, I don't know if it was the same, but of the big four banks, so NAB, Commonwealth, ANZ, and Westpac, NAB were the ones that generally offered the best conditions and slightly above average pay. So the NAB was the bank that everybody in banking wanted to work for. So when they advertised a job, a lot of bankers from those other businesses applied. NAB was attracting and retaining really good staff at that time. So I don't know if that's still the same, but certainly at that point it was. So a good reputation from the point of view of being an employer. That's what I was talking about, the attraction tool. Motivated, happy and productive employees I've talked about through this video. So that's your retention tool. Basically, if your employees are motivated, they're happy and they're productive, there's more likelihood that they're going to stay with you rather than applying for other jobs, particularly with your competitors. Reduced absenteeism and staff turnover. Absenteeism is this idea that people take sickies because they're not happy at work. You'd be amazed how many people out in the workplace take sickies, not because they're actually sick, but because they're just overwork or they're not happy with something at work, whether that's kind of a temporary situation or an ongoing situation. Absenteeism. So if you've got happy people, then absenteeism obviously will reduce. Staff turnover is people leaving a business and needing to be replaced. Again, that will reduce if people are happy and motivated. All of those things lead to lower recruitment and training costs. So if you're constantly having to recruit because people are leaving the business because they're not happy, obviously your recruitment costs are going to be high. By retaining people for longer periods of time, you're recruiting less, so you're reducing that cost base. And if you're bringing in fewer people, more often to the business, then your training costs also reduce. I've put in improved mental health there. Look, I probably wouldn't even have put in that a couple of years, but I guess the whole COVID thing again has brought a real focus on mental health, and businesses now are very much aware that mental health needs to be kind of a big focus. So again, all of these things are going to lead to an improvement in kind of well-being and mental health. And all of that kind of combined leads to that bottom one there of increased business performance and profitability. I mean, very simply, if you're lowering your recruitment costs, and your training costs and absenteeism and turnover are reducing, those are direct costs of the business. And we know that if we're reducing our direct costs, we're increasing our profitability. It's part of the same equation. So that is everything you need to know about employee expectations. That's Key Knowledge 9 done. I will see you in the next video. Cheers for now.